Hey, this is Russell Moore, and this is Reading in Exile. One of the things that some of you who know me well know is that one of the ways that I learned to be a reader very early on was through comic books, and especially DC Comics, and especially Superman, who is probably my favorite of all of the comic book heroes that we have had over the past century. And so some people have asked, well, what about Superman? Talk about that. And so let's do that. Let me tell you what I like about this figure and this character of Superman, who is often misunderstood. There are some people who will say, I don't find Superman relatable. And the reason that they don't find him relatable is because of his near invulnerability. He's bulletproof. He's able to fly. There's not much that can hurt him. And also because he is this morally relatively uncomplicated sort of character, as opposed to look at the sorts of anti-heroes that have become increasingly popular over the years, from a figure like a Batman, we'll talk about later on, who's darker, more complicated than Superman. But then certainly by the time you get to sort of your Deadpools or your Venoms or your sorts of anti-heroes who are morally very, very complicated. They may act in heroic ways, but they're coming from a more morally dark place. So some people say we don't find him very relatable. He's, in the words of one person, a big blue Boy Scout. I'm going to argue why that's not the case shortly. But first, if you want to sort of read about this figure of Superman, really good biography of a fictional character by Glenn Weldon, Superman, the Unauthorized Biography. That's probably my favorite on Superman. And then this, on sort of the superhero mythos itself by Grant Morrison, called Super Gods. It is a freaky book. I mean, Grant Morrison is a really strange sort of character with some strange ideas. But he talks about why the Superman character resonates. And so he talks about it in terms of the pantheon of mythological gods. And so Superman is a sun god in his view. And he talks about that. And then there's this one by J. Michael Straczynski called Becoming Superman, which is not so much about the character as much as it is a biography of Straczynski. It's a heartbreaking book. I mean, this is somebody who ends up writing some Superman issues later on, comes from a place of deep abuse by his father, ends up in what seems to be a really disappointing religious environment. And so he's drawn to Superman as someone who could protect him from the sort of abuse that he has. And this is a cover that he did that might be the most evocative Superman cover, I think, of all time for me. And it's a little boy in a Superman shirt with a black eye being beaten by his father. And I think there's a lot bound up in that, of this idea of vulnerability, of the need for protection. And that's part of why I think we love Superman. The other reason for that, though, is Superman's own vulnerability. So if you think about, there are many people who have made this argument, David Mamet was one of them, that what we love about Superman is not Krypton, it's kryptonite. It's that he really does have a vulnerability, and the vulnerability is the destruction of his home. So that sense of homelessness that we all have, that sense of being hurt and harmed by our past. I think as a Christian, we have very good reasons to see that biblically, but also because Superman is vulnerable not just to kryptonite, but because of the people that he loves, people who can be hurt. Brian Michael Bendis, who's the current writer of both Action Comics and Superman, has this storyline going right now where he's revealing his secret identity. to the world. And I think the best representations of Superman are those who really get at the fact that to understand him, it's not Krypton, it's Kansas. That he is shaped and formed by Ma and Pa Kent, those parents who adopted him, those parents who loved him, which is why there's a scene in the last run of Justice League where Scott Snyder and Jorge Jimenez have this image of Superman flying. Within his mind, he has his son John underneath him and his father Jonathan Kent above him. And so there's this sense of that nurturing of this person that changes his character. So if you want to read about him, I think the best place probably to start is with the Rebirth initiative of Superman starting in 2016, really reclaiming the legacy of Superman. What I love about both Action Comics and Superman at that time is that there is this sense of family, of responsibility. He's married to Lois. He's father to John. And the relationship between Clark and John is really, I think, a beautiful thing. This 2018 was the 80th anniversary of Superman, 1939, and also the 1000th issue of Action Comics. That's a good one to pick up. Also, Grant Morrison again, All-Star Superman. I'm not a huge Grant Morrison fan. I like him okay, but he's not my favorite. But this is a really good volume. And a lot of, there's a famous scene where Superman is encountering someone who's about to commit suicide, about to die by suicide. And the conversation that goes on there is really, really powerful. But my favorite Superman author is Jeff Johns. And so you could start here with Superman's Secret Origin, or here with Superman Brainiac, in which one of the storylines is the loss of Pa Kent. And I think that's a really strong series. And then Doomsday Clock, which is a 12-issue series that came out between 2017 and 2019, really controversial. And the reason it's controversial is because of the 1985 graphic novel Watchmen, which was a really dark and cynical sort of deconstruction of the superhero mythos. This puts those characters, Dr. Manhattan and Rorschach and others, with the DC universe. And so there are a lot of kind of Alan Moore purists who would say, you shouldn't do this. This is exploiting those characters. But I would argue that Doomsday Clock is not a Watchmen series. It's a Superman series. And if you notice where he goes, where Jeff Johns and Gary Frank go with this storyline, it is about Superman as the center of this, what they call a metaverse, this fictional multiverse within DC Comics. And they show how it is centered around, at every point, Superman as a vehicle of hope. So that even this famous confrontation between Superman and this godlike figure, Dr. Manhattan, who doesn't see time, he doesn't experience real emotion, he's sort of all-powerful without vulnerability. Superman takes that on, not with his invulnerability, not with strength, but with vulnerability, with humanity, and with a vision of hope that reorders the whole universe. A lot of Christological themes that I think are showing up in that, intentionally or unintentionally. So that's Superman. If you are somebody who enjoys comic books and graphic novels, let me know what you like. And also let me know in the comments what you would like for us to talk about here at Reading in Exile. See you next time.